The smirks vanished from Officers Hoffman and Reeves's faces when Zaria Washington calmly placed her FBI Director badge on the table. "This frame job ends today," she announced, her voice echoing through the suddenly silent courtroom. Their celebration turned to terror as years of corruption caught up instantly. Before we dive into this shocking story of justice served, let me know where you're watching from. In the comments below, hit that like button if you believe corrupt officers should face consequences, and subscribe to catch more true stories of justice triumphing against all odds. Now, let's rewind to see how these corrupt cops thought they had the upper hand until everything changed in an instant. Detective James Hoffman and Sergeant Richard Conley clinked their whiskey glasses in the dimly lit corner of O'Malley's Bar on Chicago's North Side, their laughter barely audible over the blues music playing through crackly speakers. "To another successful cleanup of the neighborhood," Hoffman said with a smirk that never quite reached his cold blue eyes. At 45, his once athletic build had softened into a sturdy bulk, his reddish face bearing the marks of 2 decades of police work and heavy drinking. Conley younger at 38, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and calculating green eyes, nodded appreciatively. The look on her face when we found that package in her home office, priceless. They were celebrating their latest victory, successfully planting evidence to frame Zaria Washington, a prominent black community activist and attorney who had recently moved into the wealthy Oak Ridge neighborhood. For years, the officers had been targeting successful black professionals who moved into this predominantly white enclave using a simple but effective scheme: plant evidence, make arrests, then offer to make the charges disappear in exchange for substantial payoffs. Those who refused to pay faced prosecution based on fabricated evidence, their reputations and careers destroyed. Their Lieutenant Thomas Grayson, a 25-year department veteran with political aspirations, protected the operation in exchange for a percentage, ensuring internal complaints disappeared and body camera footage was conveniently lost. "She should have played ball when we gave her the chance," Hoffman muttered, signaling the bartender for another round. "These people move into our neighborhoods thinking they're untouchable with their fancy degrees and big houses." Conley nodded, a cold calculation behind his casual demeanor. Washington was particularly deserving. "Remember how she looked at us when we first approached her, like we were dirt beneath her expensive shoes." What neither officer knew was that Zaria Washington was not merely the successful attorney and community activist she appeared to be. At 42, the elegant, sharp-minded woman with deep brown eyes that missed nothing had recently been appointed as the FBI Director after 20 years of distinguished service in the Bureau. She had kept her high-profile position quiet to protect her family while settling into the role, maintaining her legal practice as a cover while she transitioned. For months, she had been investigating a pattern of corruption in the Chicago Police Department after receiving multiple complaints from community members about similar experiences. Black professionals being arrested on dubious charges then approached about making arrangements. The complaints showed a clear pattern: all victims were black, all had recently moved into affluent neighborhoods, and all cases involved the same officers. Zaria had been meticulously building a case, analyzing evidence patterns, financial records, and complaint histories. The data pointed clearly to Hoffman and Conley as the ringleaders of a racist extortion scheme. When they planted evidence at her home, she immediately recognized it as an opportunity, not a setback. Rather than revealing her identity and authority, she made a calculated decision to play along, documenting their entire operation from the inside as their supposed victim. In her temporary apartment, away from the eyes of the officers who occasionally drove by her home to intimidate her, Zaria activated a secure line to FBI headquarters. "This is Director Washington. Initiate Operation Mirror Authorization Code. Delta 739. I need a small team, highest clearance, complete discretion." She outlined her plan to her most trusted deputy, Jordan Ellis, a brilliant tactician with 15 years of field experience. "You're deliberately putting yourself through their system," Jordan asked, concern evident in his voice. "The risk is significant, Director. We could build this case without your personal involvement." Zaria looked out at the Chicago skyline, the lights of the city reflecting in her determined eyes. "Some battles need to be fought from the trenches, not the office, Jordan. I need to experience what they're doing to these people, feel it firsthand, if I'm going to dismantle it completely. No one is untouchable, not even an FBI director. And that's exactly why I have to do this." The pounding on Zaria's front door came at 5:30 in the morning, calculated to maximize disorientation and fear. She was already awake, having anticipated their next move, but feigned sleep-addled confusion when she opened the door to find Hoffman and Conley standing on her porch, flanked by 2 uniformed officers who looked uncomfortable but remained silent. "Zaria Washington." Hoffman's voice carried artificial authority loud enough to ensure neighbors would hear. "We have a warrant to search these premises." He flashed a document too quickly for anyone to actually read it. Not that it mattered, as Zaria instantly recognized several procedural errors that made it legally questionable. She stood aside, dressed in silk pajamas that seemed to irritate Hoffman further, as if her refined taste was a personal affront. "What is this about?" she demanded, maintaining her cover while mentally noting every violation of procedure. The officers moved through her elegant brownstone with deliberate carelessness, pulling books from shelves, emptying drawers, and accidentally breaking a framed photograph of her parents. Conley made a show of checking his body camera. "Seems to be malfunctioning," he announced with practiced concern. "Yours working, Hoffman." His partner shrugged with transparent insincerity. "Must be a system issue." 20 minutes into the search, Hoffman emerged from her home office with triumphant malice. Well, what do we have here?" Between his gloved fingers was a small bag of white powder that Zaria knew with absolute certainty hadn't been there the night before. "Looks like someone's been mixing business with pleasure." Zaria allowed genuine shock and anger to show, which the officers misinterpreted as fear of being caught rather than outrage at their flagrant corruption. "That is not mine," she stated firmly, her eyes locked on Hoffman's. "You know exactly how it got there." Hoffman's smile widened. "And what are you suggesting, Ms. Washington, that officers of the law planted evidence that's a serious accusation?" He nodded to Conley, who roughly spun her around and applied handcuffs with unnecessary force, tightening them until they bit into her skin. "Zaria Washington, you're under arrest for possession of cocaine with intent to distribute. You have the right to remain silent." As they led her to the police car, Hoffman made sure they walked past several neighbors who had emerged to watch the commotion. "Shame about these professional types," he said loudly. "Think their fancy jobs put them above the law." Then, leaning closer as they reached the vehicle, his voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. "Not so high and mighty now, are you?" "Should have taken our offer when you had the chance," Conley added with quiet venom. "Some neighborhoods just aren't meant for everyone." At the precinct, the psychological intimidation continued with systematic precision. Instead of placing her in the general holding area, they isolated her in an interrogation room, leaving her handcuffed to the table for 3 hours without water or bathroom access, a clear violation of departmental regulations. Through the two-way mirror, Zaria could sense their eyes on her, waiting for signs of breaking. She allowed herself to show carefully calibrated stress, occasionally shifting uncomfortably, or checking the door, giving them the satisfaction they sought while concealing her true purpose. When she requested her phone call, Conley smiled thinly. "System's down for calls. Technical issue. We'll let you know when it's back up." Another 4 hours passed before Hoffman finally entered with a paper cup of water and a false smile. "Sorry about the wait. Busy morning." He sat across from her, maintaining eye contact as he placed a folder on the table with theatrical precision. So, counselor, quite a surprise finding that much cocaine in your possession. Street value of about $15,000. That's intent to distribute territory 5 to 10 years depending on the judge. Quite a career ender. Zaria remained silent, studying him with the careful observation skills that had made her a legendary field agent before her directorship. Hoffman continued, leaning forward with manufactured concern. Look, Washington, things happen. Good people make mistakes. Or, he paused meaningfully. Sometimes misunderstandings occur between people who should be on the same side. When she didn't respond, his demeanor shifted, the facade of professionalism dropping completely. We've dealt with your type before, moving into neighborhoods where you don't belong, thinking your degrees and money make you better than everyone else. Oak Ridge has standards, traditions. People who want to live there need to understand how things work. Conley entered then, playing the role of good cop with practiced ease. What my partner is trying to say is that there might be a way to resolve this situation amicably. These charges don't necessarily have to stick. Unknown to either officer, the seemingly standard-issue watch on Zaria's wrist contained a miniature recording device authorized by a federal judge as part of her ongoing corruption investigation. Every word they spoke was being captured with crystal clarity. With careful precision, she guided the conversation. "I don't understand what you're suggesting," she said, allowing vulnerability to enter her voice. "Is there some kind of arrangement possible?" The bait was taken immediately. Hoffman glanced at the two-way mirror, then reached over and unplugged the room's camera with casual disregard for protocol. "Let's speak plainly. This isn't your first rodeo, and it isn't ours. We have an understanding with certain residents in Oak Ridge. A community tax, if you will." As he outlined their extortion scheme in increasingly explicit terms, the door opened briefly, and Lieutenant Grayson entered. The lieutenant, a tall man with silver hair and the polished appearance of someone with political ambitions, nodded almost imperceptibly at his officers before addressing Zaria. "Ms. Washington, I trust my officers are processing you efficiently. We take drug crimes very seriously in this district." Without waiting for a response, he departed, having established his presence while maintaining plausible deniability about the actual conversation. After he left, Conley closed the door completely and spoke more directly. $25,000 makes this disappear entirely. Evidence gets logged incorrectly. Chain of custody, breaks case dismissed. $10,000 gets you reduced charges, simple possession, community service, sealed record, after 1 year. Hoffman added with a smirk, "Dr. Franklin on Lakeside Drive paid $30,000 last year. James Williams, the architect, paid $20,000. They're both still enjoying their beautiful homes without any further issues." Conley, slightly more cautious, still provided details that made Zaria's heart race, with the knowledge they were burying themselves with every word. "Cash only, obviously. We can provide instructions for drop locations, or if you prefer offshore transfers through a specific setup we've arranged." Zaria allowed her posture to slump slightly, as if defeated. "And if I don't have that kind of money available?" Hoffman's smile vanished, replaced by cold certainty. "Then you become an example. Maximum charges, maximum publicity, maximum sentencing. Your law career ends, your reputation is destroyed, and you'll still lose your house to legal fees. Either way, you won't be our neighbor much longer." As they left her alone again to consider her options, neither officer realized they had just delivered a comprehensive confession of their entire criminal enterprise directly to the FBI director. The fluorescent lights of the public defender's office buzzed irritatingly as Marcus Reynolds shuffled through an overflowing case file box. At 34, his idealism had been tempered by the relentless grind of a system that processed people like widgets on an assembly line. When Zaria was brought in as his newest client, his initial assessment was colored by cynicism born of experience. Another defendant claiming innocence, despite evidence to the contrary. "Ms. Washington, I've been assigned as your public defender." He began without looking up, his voice flat from delivering the same speech dozens of times weekly. "I have to inform you that with my current caseload, I can offer about 3 hours to prepare for your preliminary hearing. The prosecution is offering a plea deal of—" Zaria interrupted him gently. "Mr. Reynolds, I believe there are irregularities in my case that merit closer attention." Something in her calm, analytical tone made him actually look at her, really see her for the first time. Her composed demeanor differed markedly from his typical client's. "I'm listening, he said, setting aside the plea agreement. "The officers who arrested me, Hoffman and Conley, have a documented pattern of targeting black professionals in predominantly white neighborhoods. The evidence was planted, the warrant execution violated multiple procedures, and their body cameras were conveniently malfunctioning." Reynolds had heard similar claims before, but as Zaria methodically identified 7 distinct procedural violations in her arrest report details, most lawyers would miss, let alone defendants. His interest was piqued. "You seem unusually familiar with police procedure," he observed. "I've handled cases involving police misconduct," she replied carefully. "These officers aren't sloppy, they're deliberate. This is a systematic operation." Meanwhile, across town, Hoffman and Conley were meeting with Assistant District Attorney Victoria Keller, an ambitious prosecutor with political aspirations who had built her reputation on being tough on crime, a stance that often translated to aggressive prosecution of minorities while showing remarkable flexibility with white defendants. "We need this one fast-tracked," Hoffman was saying, leaning against her desk with casual familiarity that suggested their relationship extended beyond professional courtesy. "She's a flight risk." Keller raised an eyebrow. "A community activist lawyer with deep ties to Chicago is a flight risk." Conley stepped in smoothly. "She has resources we can't track. Plus, making an example of a lawyer sends a message. Your conviction rate could use a high-profile win like this." The mention of her statistics struck home. Keller had been angling for the district attorney position, and a successful prosecution of a lawyer for drug crimes would certainly distinguish her from other candidates. "I'll personally handle the case," she decided without bothering to thoroughly review the evidence. "Maximum charges, no leniency." While these legal maneuvers were underway, Jordan Ellis coordinated a small FBI team investigating every case Hoffman and Conley had handled in the past 5 years. Working from an unmarked location, they identified 27 other black professionals who had been similarly targeted after moving into affluent neighborhoods. The pattern was unmistakable. Each victim had first received minor citations or traffic stops, followed by more serious charges if they didn't cooperate. Most had paid bribes or pled to lesser charges rather than risk their careers fighting a system stacked against them. The financial investigation yielded even more damning evidence. Both officers had made regular deposits to offshore accounts, and their spending far exceeded their official salaries. Luxury watches, vacation properties, and private school tuitions created a paper trail of unexplained wealth. The morning of Zaria's bail hearing brought additional complications when she was assigned to Judge Walter Harmon's courtroom. Harmon, a 60-year-old white man with a reputation for harsh treatment of black defendants, had been on the bench for 15 years and was known for setting bail so high that working-class defendants remained incarcerated until trial, often leading to plea deals regardless of actual guilt. The courtroom was packed. Community activists had spread word about Zaria's case, bringing media attention that clearly irritated the judge. "Bail is set at $1 million, Harmon announced after a perfunctory hearing, ignoring both the standard bail schedule for first-time offenders and Marcus's detailed argument about Zaria's community ties and lack of flight risk. The gallery erupted in protests as Zaria was led away in restraints. Unknown to everyone present, 3 of the community supporters in the courtroom were actually FBI agents documenting the proceedings and Judge Harmon's departure from normal judicial practice. As guards escorted her back toward the holding cells, Hoffman stepped into her path momentarily. Last chance to make this go away before your life is ruined forever. He whispered close enough that only she could hear. Zaria met his gaze steadily. Sometimes the game changes when you least expect it, she replied quietly. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face before his arrogance reasserted itself. Your choice. He shrugged, interpreting her response as empty bravado rather than the warning it actually was. What do you think about how these corrupt officers are operating their scheme? Would you have the courage to stand up to such a system like Zaria is doing? Comment number 1 if you believe the justice system needs major reform to prevent this kind of corruption. Or number 2 if you think these are just isolated incidents. Hit that like button if you're rooting for Zaria to turn the tables on these corrupt officers. Subscribe now to see how this incredible story unfolds. Have you ever witnessed or experienced unfair treatment by authorities? What would you do if you were in Zaria's position? Play along to gather evidence or immediately reveal your identity and power. The stakes are about to get higher as we continue this shocking true story of corruption and justice. The county jail cell was deliberately austere. A thin mattress on a metal frame, a stainless steel toilet without privacy, and constant noise from other inmates and guards. Zaria sat on the edge of the bed, methodically tearing small pieces from her commissary receipt and rolling them into tiny pellets between her fingers. To the surveillance cameras, she appeared to be a woman processing stress through nervous habits. In reality, she was creating a coded message using a technique developed for deep-cover FBI operations. During her daily phone call, finally granted after Marcus filed a formal complaint, she spoke with Jordan under the guise of a concerned friend. Her seemingly casual comments about family members and neighborhood events contained embedded instructions for the ongoing investigation. Aunt Patricia's health concerns directed Jordan to investigate Judge Harmon's financial records. Uncle Victor's new business venture signaled interest in ADA Keller's case history and career progression. Jordan had assembled a troubling statistical analysis. Hoffman and Conley stopped black drivers at 4 times the rate of white drivers in the same neighborhoods. Their asset forfeitures disproportionately targeted minority business owners, and they had an unusual pattern of drug discoveries in homes of successful black professionals in predominantly white neighborhoods. The pattern was so statistically improbable that it could only be explained by deliberate targeting. The investigation expanded beyond the 2 officers as Zaria suspected the corruption network extended further into the system. Her instincts proved correct when the team discovered Judge Harmon had received substantial consulting fees from businesses linked to Lieutenant Grayson through a series of shell companies. More disturbing was ADA Keller's rapid career advancement despite mediocre case results until they traced her connection to Police Commissioner Wallace, whose recommendation had accelerated her promotion track after she dismissed questionable evidence in cases involving officers under his command. Marcus Reynolds, initially skeptical of conspiracy claims, became a true believer after experiencing the system's backlash firsthand. Within days of taking Zaria's case seriously, his office received notification of funding cuts due to budget reassessment. His previous cases underwent unusual scrutiny from judicial review committees, and he suddenly found himself receiving traffic tickets for infractions he hadn't committed. Late one night, as he worked alone in his office, a junior public defender named Alicia Martinez knocked tentatively on his door. "You should know what they're saying about you," she warned. "The word from the courthouse is that you're committing career suicide by pushing the Washington case. They're saying examples will be made." Rather than intimidate him, the pressure confirmed his growing suspicions and strengthened his resolve. "Then we must be on to something significant," he replied, turning back to the case files with renewed determination. A potential breakthrough came when Officer Tiana Rodriguez, a 26-year-old recent academy graduate who had been present during the search of Zaria's home, contacted Marcus through an anonymous email. "I saw things that didn't match the report, Ida," she wrote. "The evidence wasn't where they claimed. I have documentation." They arranged to meet at a coffee shop far from the precinct where Rodriguez nervously slid a flash drive across the table. "I made copies of the original photos before they were altered," she whispered. "The timestamps don't match what was submitted to evidence." Her hands trembled slightly as she added, "I became a cop to protect people, not to frame them." Within hours of this meeting, Rodriguez was reassigned to foot patrol in the city's highest crime area, a known punishment posting, and found a dead rat in her locker with a note reading, "We handle our own problems." When Zaria learned of this development through Marcus's coded visit, she immediately authorized FBI protection for both Rodriguez and Reynolds, assigning plainclothes agents to monitor them without their knowledge. The scope of the corruption became clearer when FBI surveillance captured a late-night meeting at an exclusive club accessible only through a private entrance. Lieutenant Grayson arrived first, securing a back room before being joined by Hoffman Conley Police Commissioner Wallace and a man identified as Deputy Mayor Harrison. The FBI's directional microphones captured fragments of their conversation. "This Washington situation needs containment," Commissioner Wallace stated flatly. "She's not like the others. Her connections in the activist community are generating attention." Deputy Mayor Harrison seemed particularly concerned. "The last thing we need is federal oversight. The arrangement has been profitable for everyone. Make sure she takes the deal." Grayson assured them the situation was under control. "Hoffman and Conley have never failed to persuade a target. She'll break like the others." As the meeting concluded, Commissioner Wallace issued a final warning that sent a chill through the FBI monitoring team. "This one could expose everything if not handled properly. If persuasion fails, more permanent solutions might be necessary. The operation is too valuable to too many people." The implied threat of violence elevated the case from corruption to potential conspiracy to commit murder, triggering emergency protocols within the FBI team. Zaria, receiving this information through carefully arranged legal visits from agents posing as paralegals, realized the investigation had uncovered something far larger than individual corrupt officers. They had stumbled upon a systemic network that reached into the highest levels of city government and law enforcement. The stakes were no longer merely about her case, but about exposing an entrenched criminal enterprise that had been operating with impunity for years. Day 23 in county lockup brought a new level of harassment orchestrated by Lieutenant Grayson. Zaria was transferred to a cell block housing violent offenders, a clear violation of detention protocols for her classification. Her medications for hypertension, a condition documented in her intake forms, were misplaced for 3 consecutive days, causing her blood pressure to spike dangerously. During a surprise cell search, guards confiscated her legal notes as contraband, returning them days later with key pages missing. The psychological warfare extended beyond physical conditions. Guards delivered her meals last, ensuring they were cold, and accidentally scheduled her for shower time during her limited attorney meetings, forcing her to choose between hygiene and legal consultation. Through it all, Zaria maintained her cover, though the isolation from family and normal duties took an unexpected toll. During a rare moment of privacy in the shower facilities, she leaned against the tiled wall, closing her eyes as the lukewarm water washed over her. For the first time since beginning the operation, doubt crept in. Was her undercover approach worth the personal cost? The conditions she endured were taking a physical toll that couldn't be ignored, and the corruption appeared to reach higher than initially suspected. Her thoughts drifted to her journey to this moment. Growing up on Chicago's South Side in the 90s, she had witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of both crime and over-policing on her community. Her older brother Marcus had been beaten by officers responding to a noise complaint when she was just 14, leaving him with permanent injuries and no legal recourse when the officers claimed he had resisted arrest. No video evidence existed then, and the officer's word was unquestioned by the system. That incident shaped her path, driving her determination through college on a scholarship, then law school, where she graduated at the top of her class despite professors who subtly questioned whether she belonged in elite academic spaces. The FBI had recruited her directly from law school, recognizing her unique combination of legal acumen, street knowledge, and unshakable moral compass. 20 years of distinguished service followed with specializations in civil rights violations and public corruption cases. Her appointment as director had been historic, but hard-earned, the culmination of decades fighting the system from within. During her private swearing-in ceremony 6 months earlier, she had made a personal pledge beyond the official oath: "I will address systemic corruption and racial injustice in law enforcement, not just through policy, but through action." This case represented her commitment to that promise, experiencing firsthand what countless citizens endured when facing a system designed to break them. Her reflection was interrupted by a guard banging on the shower door. "Time's up, Washington. Visitor waiting." In the visitation room, Jordan sat across from her, posing as her cousin. Their conversation seemed ordinary to observers, family updates, and mundane discussions about her apartment maintenance, but contained coded updates about the investigation's progress and growing concerns from Washington about her extended undercover role. "Uncle James is worried about your extended absence from family gatherings," Jordan said, communicating that FBI leadership was questioning the wisdom of having the director remain undercover as the case expanded. "Some family members think you should come home immediately for the reunion next week." He added, indicating that several assistant directors were advocating for her extraction before political complications arose. Zaria responded with seemingly casual reminiscence about family traditions that actually conveyed her determination to continue. "Grandmother always said the harvest isn't complete until you've picked every fruit from the tree. I've missed too many reunions to leave this one early." Jordan recognized her resolve, but still conveyed his professional concern through their code. "The branches extend further than we initially thought. The orchard might be too large for one harvester." Their conversation was interrupted briefly as a guard approached, lingering near their table longer than necessary before moving on. Once alone again, Zaria lowered her voice. "I need to see this through Jordan. Everything we've suspected for years about systemic bias is embodied in this case. Extracting me now leaves vulnerable people at their mercy." The risks became more apparent when Marcus arrived for their legal consultation the following day, visibly shaken despite his attempts to maintain professional composure. "They followed my son to school yesterday," he revealed quietly. "An unmarked car with 2 men parked outside the building all day. When Tyler left for basketball practice, they followed him there too, just making sure we knew they were watching." The implied threat to his 16-year-old son crossed a line that transformed his professional advocacy into personal determination. Simultaneously, Officer Rodriguez faced her own retribution. After providing evidence of tampering, she was accused of the very misconduct she had reported. Internal Affairs, controlled by Commissioner Wallace, claimed she had mishandled evidence in previous cases, resulting in her suspension pending investigation. These escalating tactics convinced Zaria that the corruption network was far larger and more dangerous than initially assessed. Through careful communication with Jordan, she authorized expanded surveillance and expedited the gathering of federal warrants, knowing that each day she remained in custody increased both the danger to those helping her and the likelihood of exposure of her true identity. The full extent of the conspiracy revealed itself through a surveillance operation targeting Commissioner Wallace. FBI agents posing as maintenance workers placed listening devices in his private office just hours before he held a closed-door meeting with Judge Harmon. "The Washington case needs to disappear," Wallace stated bluntly, pouring scotch into 2 glasses without offering one to the judge, a power move establishing the hierarchy between them. Not just dismissed, but buried. No appeals, no civil suits afterward. Judge Harmon, less composed than his public persona suggested, fidgeted with his tie. The public defender is becoming problematic. He's filing motions that could expose procedural issues beyond this single case. Wallace's response chilled the listening agents. Harmon, this isn't just about a few officers supplementing their income. The seized drugs from major busts haven't been reaching evidence lockup at full volume for years. That difference has financed campaigns, retirements, and a distribution network that makes everyone involved too wealthy to risk exposure. Make an example of her, or we all go down. The pieces finally connected. What had appeared to be a localized corruption scheme was actually a fragment of a massive criminal enterprise involving seized drugs being resold through police channels with profits laundered through legitimate businesses and political campaigns. Zaria's case had inadvertently pulled at a thread that could unravel decades of entrenched corruption reaching into every level of city government and law enforcement. 3 days before the trial date, Zaria finally authorized Jordan to brief a select group of trusted federal prosecutors and agents about her true identity and operation. The meeting took place in a secure facility outside Chicago, with participants required to surrender all electronic devices before entering. For the past 5 weeks, Jordan began, FBI Director Zaria Washington has been operating undercover within the Chicago criminal justice system, documenting a police corruption network from the inside. The revelation stunned even these experienced federal officials. Special Agent Diana Chen, head of the Chicago field office, was visibly shocked. The director herself is the bait in this operation. Why wasn't I informed? Jordan displayed the authorization documentation signed by the Attorney General. Operational security required absolute compartmentalization. Even now, only the people in this room know her true identity. The team reviewed the mountain of evidence, gathered financial records showing inexplicable wealth among targeted officers, statistical analysis proving racial targeting surveillance footage of meetings between officials implicated in the conspiracy, and most damning audio recordings of explicit corruption and extortion captured by Zaria's concealed devices. Special Prosecutor William Tanner, brought in from the Justice Department's Public Integrity Section, whistled softly as he reviewed the files. This is enough for RICO charges against the entire network. We're talking dozens of indictments across multiple agencies. Federal warrants were prepared for 17 initial targets, with provisions to expand as more conspirators were identified. Coordination with trusted elements of internal affairs, carefully vetted by the FBI, established a secure chain of custody for evidence that would bypass compromised officials. The timing required precision arrests would need to happen simultaneously to prevent conspirators from warning each other or destroying evidence. While this federal response took shape, Hoffman and Conley grew increasingly confident, unaware of the trap closing around them. In the precinct locker room, they openly discussed fabricating additional evidence, including false witness statements claiming to have seen Zaria selling drugs near a school, an enhancement that would add years to her potential sentence. I've got a CI who'll say whatever we need for $500 and a pass on his possession charge. Hoffman boasted, using the term for confidential informant while changing into his court suit. Chen from the tech unit doctored the surveillance footage to put her car near the school that day. Conley, always slightly more cautious, still participated fully in the scheme. Keller's on board to introduce it mid-trial for maximum impact. Washington won't know what hit her. They celebrated prematurely with other officers, boasting about putting another troublemaker in her place. Once this case closes, she'll be breaking rocks for 5 years minimum, Hoffman predicted, unless she finally decides to pay up, which is even better for us. Their attitude reflected a bone-deep confidence in the system's protection, a belief that their actions were effectively untouchable, because the oversight mechanisms were either compromised or toothless. Marcus faced different challenges as he prepared the defense. Other public defenders avoided him in the office, afraid that his situation might be contagious. His supervisor called him in for a concern meeting. "Reynolds, I admire your dedication, but this crusade is affecting the office's relationship with the DA. Perhaps another attorney should take over the Washington case." Marcus stood his ground. "With all due respect, sir, that would violate my client's right to counsel of her choice. If you remove me, I'll file an ethics complaint with the Bar Association." The supervisor backed down, but the message was clear. Powerful forces wanted this case handled quietly and conventionally, with a guilty plea, rather than a trial that might expose systemic issues. Working long hours with information discreetly provided by Zaria's FBI team through anonymous tips and misdelivered documents, Marcus constructed a defense strategy designed to draw out the officer's lies and inconsistencies on the witness stand. Each question was crafted to seem innocuous while setting up devastating contradictions with evidence he would introduce later. His colleagues watched with a mixture of admiration and concern, believing he was committing career suicide by challenging powerful police interests so aggressively. Meanwhile, FBI agents had quietly contacted several previous victims of the officer's scheme. Initial approaches were met with fear and resistance. Many had rebuilt their lives after the traumatic experiences and feared retaliation if they spoke out. Dr. Raymond Carter, a neurosurgeon who had paid $50,000 after drugs were planted in his medical office, initially refused to cooperate. "You don't understand what these people are capable of," he told the agents. "They didn't just threaten me, they knew where my children went to school, their schedules. I paid to protect my family, not just my career." Gradually, with assurances of federal protection and evidence that many others had been similarly victimized, these witnesses agreed to testify. Their collective stories formed a damning pattern that couldn't be dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. The night before giving his formal statement, Dr. Carter was found beaten in his garage, sustaining a concussion and 3 broken ribs. Despite his hospitalization, he demonstrated remarkable courage, recording his testimony from his hospital bed. "I won't be intimidated again," he stated, his bruised face becoming a powerful piece of evidence itself. "They took my money, my dignity, and my trust in the system. They won't take my voice." The attack backfired by strengthening the resolve of other witnesses and providing concrete evidence of witness intimidation that could be added to the charging documents. On the eve of trial, final preparations were underway on both sides. Zaria granted a private meeting with Marcus ostensibly to discuss plea options. Instead, revealed a partial truth. "There's something you need to know, Mr. Reynolds. I'm not exactly who you think I am." She didn't disclose her FBI position yet. That revelation was planned for maximum impact in the courtroom, but she provided him with specific questions to ask during cross-examination that would elicit the most damaging responses. When you ask about their financial records, start with questions about their department salaries before introducing the offshore accounts. And when questioning Officer Rodriguez, begin with general procedure questions before addressing my specific case. Trust me on this sequencing. Simultaneously, Hoffman and Conley met with Lieutenant Grayson in his office after hours reviewing their testimony to ensure consistency. "Remember, the search was by the book. You both observed the drugs in plain sight on her desk, and the body cameras malfunctioned due to technical issues noted in reports filed the previous week." Grayson instructed, sliding a folder containing the backdated technical reports across his desk. "We've handled dozens of these cases successfully. The system works for us, not them." What did you think about how the corrupt officers targeted successful black professionals? Comment. Number 1. If you believe racial targeting in law enforcement is a widespread problem that needs addressing. Or number 2, if you think these officers are just bad apples in an otherwise fair system. Hit that like button if you're excited to see these corrupt officials finally face justice. Subscribe now to make sure you don't miss the dramatic courtroom revelation that's coming up. Have you ever witnessed someone abuse their authority, thinking they were untouchable? How do you think the officers will react when they discover who Zaria really is? The courtroom showdown is about to begin, and you won't believe what happens next. The William J. Campbell Courthouse buzzed with unusual activity on Monday morning. Media vans lined the street outside, attracted by community activists who had organized a support rally for Zaria. Court officers conducted extra security sweeps, and the public gallery filled completely an hour before proceedings were scheduled to begin. Most puzzling to Hoffman and Conley was the presence of unfamiliar federal agents positioning themselves strategically throughout the building. Probably a terrorism case in another courtroom, Hoffman speculated, though the uncertainty visibly unsettled him. Feds love to show off their badges. Conley nodded in agreement, but his eyes tracked the agents with growing suspicion. Seems like a lot of manpower for a standard case day. And did you notice they all arrived within the same 10-minute window? Both officers dismissed their unease, attributing the attention to Zaria's status as an attorney and community figure. Neither could imagine the true reason for the federal presence or the carefully choreographed operation about to unfold. Judge Harmon entered precisely at 9, his typical scowl deepening at the packed gallery. "This court will maintain absolute order," he warned, glaring particularly at the community supporters. "Any disruptions will result in immediate removal and contempt charges." The case was called with formal charges: possession of cocaine with intent to distribute with enhancements for possession within 1,000 feet of a school zone, fabricated charges that could carry up to 15 years in prison. ADEA Keller approached the podium in an expensive charcoal suit chosen specifically for the cameras she expected would cover her victory. Her opening statement painted Zaria as a privileged professional who believed laws applied to others but not herself. The defendant used her position as an attorney and her facade as a community activist to conceal criminal activity, Keller asserted with practiced indignation. Evidence will show that Ms. Washington possessed substantial quantities of cocaine, not for personal use, but for distribution, including near educational facilities where children could be endangered. Throughout her 20-minute presentation, Keller never explicitly mentioned race but employed coded language and stereotypes recognizable to the black community members, present references to Zaria's aggressive attitude during arrest, her flashy lifestyle beyond her legitimate means, and her intimidating presence in the neighborhood. When Marcus approached for the defense, opening the contrast was immediately apparent. Where Keller had been theatrical, he was measured, his voice calm but resolute. "This case is not about drugs," he began simply. "No drugs belonging to Ms. Washington will be presented because none existed. This case is about a systematic pattern of evidence fabrication, procedural violations, and targeted harassment by officers Hoffman and Conley against successful black professionals who moved into Oak Ridge neighborhood." He methodically outlined 7 specific procedural violations in the search warrant execution, discrepancies in evidence handling, and the suspicious failure of body cameras during critical moments. Most importantly, he concluded, this case represents a pattern of behavior that has victimized dozens of citizens whose only crime was being black in what certain officers considered the wrong neighborhood. Throughout his presentation, Marcus noticed Judge Harmon becoming increasingly uncomfortable, repeatedly checking the courtroom doors as if expecting intervention. The prosecution's case proceeded with Hoffman taking the stand first. With practiced confidence born from years of successful perjury, he described the routine search of Zaria's home and his surprise at discovering cocaine prominently displayed on her desk. "Based on my 15 years of narcotics experience, the quantity and packaging indicated intent to distribute rather than personal use," he testified, making eye contact with jurors to establish credibility. When Keller questioned him about the body camera failure, he had a rehearsed explanation ready. "We submitted maintenance requests the previous week due to intermittent malfunctions. Unfortunately, both units failed completely during this operation, a coincidence, but a documented one." Conley's testimony corroborated his partner's account with suspicious precision, using nearly identical phrasing about the discovery and their professional assessment of the evidence. Both officers described Zaria as combative and disrespectful during the arrest, carefully building the stereotype of an angry black woman to prejudice the primarily white jury. Cross-examination began with Marcus asking seemingly innocuous questions about departmental procedures and record-keeping requirements, technical details that lulled the officers into a false sense of security. After establishing this non-threatening pattern for several minutes, he suddenly changed direction. "Officer Hoffman, could you explain the deposits totaling $78,000 made to your Cayman Islands account over the past 14 months? The courtroom fell silent as Hoffman froze momentarily before recovering. "I'm not aware of what you're referring to. I don't have offshore accounts." Marcus approached with documentation obtained through FBI channels. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter Defense Exhibit C banking records for account number CH75389 in Cayman National Bank, opened under James Hoffman's name and Social Security number with his passport used as identification." Judge Harmon attempted to intervene. "Counselor, what relevance could Officer Hoffman's personal finances possibly have to this drug case?" Marcus was prepared for this objection. "Your Honor, these financial records directly establish motive for evidence fabrication and show a pattern of unexplained wealth consistent with extortion proceeds. The Supreme Court established in Crawford v. Washington that evidence of financial motive is admissible when questioning law enforcement testimony." While legally sound, the real purpose of this exchange was forcing Judge Harmon to either allow the questioning or make a legally questionable ruling that could later be used to demonstrate judicial misconduct. After visible hesitation, the judge reluctantly allowed the line of questioning to continue. Hoffman claimed the funds came from a family inheritance, but his discomfort was evident to everyone in the courtroom. Conley maintained better composure during similar questioning about his finances, having anticipated some financial scrutiny, though his explanation for purchasing a vacation property in Costa Rica, valued at 3 times his annual salary, strained credibility. The true strategy unfolded when Marcus presented statistical analysis of the officers' arrest patterns, showing they stopped black drivers at 4 times the rate of white drivers, and that 87% of their drug arrests in the past 3 years involved black professionals who had recently moved into predominantly white neighborhoods. "Officer Conley, how do you explain this remarkable statistical anomaly in your enforcement patterns?" Marcus asked. "Pure coincidence," Conley responded dismissively. "We go where the crime is. And it just happens that the crime is wherever successful black professionals move into Oak Ridge." The question hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Judge Harmon attempted to declare this line of questioning irrelevant, but Marcus connected it directly to bias motivation and discriminatory enforcement foundations for his claim of evidence fabrication. The officers' demeanor transformed from confident to concerned as they realized this wasn't proceeding like their previous cases. The trial's direction changed dramatically when Marcus called Officer Tiana Rodriguez to testify. As she approached the witness stand, her uniform pressed, but her expression tense. Hoffman whispered urgently to Conley, "What the hell is Rodriguez doing here? She wasn't even on the witness list." Judge Harmon appeared equally surprised, checking his documents with furrowed brow. Despite intense pressure and visible fear, Rodriguez testified about evidence handling violations she had witnessed. The evidence bag containing the cocaine wasn't logged until 3 hours after the search, contrary to department procedure requiring immediate documentation, she stated, her voice growing steadier as she continued. "And Officer Hoffman had me alter the property receipt to change the location where the drugs were allegedly found." The courtroom erupted as Hoffman shouted, "You lying bitch!" while Conley whispered urgently to Lieutenant Grayson in the gallery. Judge Harmon banged his gavel repeatedly, struggling to maintain order while casting panicked glances toward the courthouse doors. As bailiffs restored order, the judge called for an immediate recess, his typical composure completely abandoned. "Court will resume tomorrow morning at 9, he announced, almost fleeing the bench without the usual formalities. In the hallway, FBI agents positioned themselves near all exits, their presence no longer subtle. The first day of trial had made one thing abundantly clear to everyone involved. This was not proceeding according to the corrupt system's usual script, and powerful people were beginning to realize their vulnerability. Morning sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows as day 3 of the trial began illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like the tension vibrating through the packed courtroom. The previous day had ended with the prosecution's case in shambles after Rodriguez's devastating testimony about evidence tampering. ADA Keller had attempted damage control through redirect examination of Hoffman and Conley, but their credibility had been irreparably damaged. Judge Harmon entered looking visibly strained, his typical authoritative demeanor replaced by a nervousness that manifested in constant throat clearing and avoidance of eye contact with the gallery. Marcus began the defense case by calling Dr. Raymond Carter, who was wheeled into the courtroom still bearing the visible injuries from his attack. His face, partially obscured by bandages, commanded immediate sympathy from the jury. "Dr. Carter, could you please explain to the court your interaction with Officers Hoffman and Conley approximately 14 months ago?" Marcus asked gently. Carter described in meticulous detail how the officers had planted cocaine in his medical office during what was supposed to be a routine inspection, then explicitly offered to make the charges disappear in exchange for $50,000. They knew exactly what they were doing, he testified, his voice growing stronger despite his physical weakness. "Officer Hoffman told me, 'Doctors like you can afford the community tax.' When I asked what he meant, Officer Conley explained that successful black professionals moving into Oak Ridge needed to contribute to neighborhood security or face consequences." 2 more witnesses followed with nearly identical accounts. Andrea Simmons, a bank executive who had paid $30,000 after drugs were found in her car during a questionable traffic stop, and Michael Barnes, an architect who lost his license and practice after refusing to pay and subsequently being convicted on planted evidence. Their powerful testimony visibly affected the jury, whose expressions had transformed from neutral assessment to growing outrage as the pattern became undeniable. During the lunch recess, ADA Keller approached Marcus in the courthouse corridor, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Reynolds, we need to talk," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I'm prepared to offer complete dismissal of all charges in exchange for your client's agreement not to pursue civil claims against the department or officers involved." The desperation in her voice revealed her recognition that the case had become a liability rather than a career opportunity. Marcus returned to the courtroom without answering where Zaria had made the decision to take the stand in her own defense, a risky move that surprised everyone, including her FBI team. As she was sworn in, she appeared composed in a simple navy suit, her dignity and intelligence evident despite weeks in detention. Under direct examination, she calmly recounted the arrest from her perspective, highlighting procedural violations and documenting the racist comments made throughout the process. "Officer Hoffman told me that people like you don't belong in Oak Ridge regardless of what we can afford," she testified. Officer Conley added that I could either pay the neighborhood tax or suffer the consequences when I asked if they were extorting me. Officer Hoffman said it wasn't extortion, but community relations management. During cross-examination, a desperate Keller attempted to salvage something from the collapsing case by aggressively attacking Zaria's credibility. "Isn't it true that you've made numerous public statements about alleged police bias, Ms. Washington? That you've built your reputation on claims of systemic racism?" Keller demanded, her voice rising with each question. "Isn't it possible your allegations are simply an extension of your activist agenda rather than facts?" This aggressive approach backfired dramatically, making Keller appear defensive while allowing Zaria to respond with measured dignity. "I've documented specific instances of misconduct with dates, times, and direct quotes," she replied calmly. My concerns about systemic issues are based on data and experience, not ideology. Keller's questioning inadvertently opened the door for the critical revelation. When she returned to defense questioning, Marcus asked a seemingly simple question. Ms. Washington, can you explain to the court why you believe these officers targeted you specifically? The room grew perfectly still as Zaria rose from the witness stand, her posture straightening as she shed the demeanor of a defendant. With deliberate movements, she reached into her suit jacket and produced her FBI Director credentials, holding them up for the jury to see clearly. Perhaps because they didn't know they were attempting to extort the federal director of the FBI, who has been investigating their criminal enterprise for the past 6 months. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Hoffman lunged toward Zaria with rage, distorting his features, only to be intercepted and restrained by federal agents who emerged from the gallery with practiced efficiency. Conley, always more calculating, attempted to flee through a side door, but found his path blocked by more agents who had positioned themselves at every exit. Judge Harmon frantically banged his gavel while simultaneously trying to leave the bench, his face ashen with shock and fear. As he reached the side door to his chambers, 2 federal marshals approached with badges extended, effectively cutting off his escape. Throughout the courtroom, similar scenes unfolded as the carefully orchestrated operation activated. Lieutenant Grayson was handcuffed in the gallery, his face a mask of disbelief. Commissioner Wallace, who had arrived only minutes earlier to observe what he thought would be the successful conclusion of the trial, found himself surrounded by agents before he could comprehend what was happening. ADA Keller remained frozen at the prosecution table, documents slipping from her trembling hands as she watched her career and freedom disintegrating before her eyes. Jordan Ellis entered through the main doors, flanked by senior FBI officials who had been waiting for this moment. United States Federal Marshals, he announced formally. This court is now under the jurisdiction of the Federal District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. All current proceedings are suspended pending federal indictments. The shell-shocked jury was formally dismissed as jurisdiction transferred to federal court. Their expressions ranged from confusion to vindication as they filed out, several nodding respectfully to Zaria as they passed. The final image that dominated the courtroom was Hoffman and Conley, now handcuffed and flanked by federal agents, staring in absolute disbelief at Zaria as she calmly instructed the federal team on processing procedures. Their expressions shifted from initial shock to dawning horror as they realized the extent of evidence against them and the power of the woman they had so gravely underestimated. Secure all evidence and department devices immediately, Zaria directed the team. Electronic records are being seized simultaneously at the precinct and headquarters. No communications in or out until all targets are in custody. As the officers were led away, Hoffman turned back toward her, incomprehension still evident in his eyes. "You were just supposed to be another rich black lawyer," he muttered, seemingly unable to process the reversal of power. Zaria met his gaze steadily. "And you were never supposed to be above the law," she replied, as the doors closed behind them, symbolically and literally closing this chapter of systematic corruption. 3 months after the dramatic courtroom revelation, Zaria stood at the podium in a congressional hearing room, her testimony being broadcast on major networks as part of a special investigation into systemic police corruption. What began as an investigation into 2 corrupt officers revealed a criminal enterprise extending through multiple levels of Chicago's government and law enforcement, she explained to the riveted committee members. Federal indictments have been issued against 28 police officers, 4 judges, 3 prosecutors, and 6 city officials, including Deputy Mayor Harrison. The investigation has subsequently expanded to similar corruption networks in 3 neighboring districts, triggering what is now the largest police corruption probe in the city's history. Senator Eleanor Martinez leaned forward, her expression grave. "Director Washington, your decision to personally go undercover was unprecedented for someone in your position. Could you explain your reasoning to the committee?" Zaria considered the question carefully before responding. Systems of injustice cannot be fully understood from a position of privilege or power. I needed to experience what thousands of Americans, particularly Black Americans, endure when facing a system designed to break them rather than serve them. I spent 23 days in detention experiencing dehumanizing conditions that no American should face, particularly not those presumed innocent under our Constitution. She described in powerful detail the psychological tactics used to pressure defendants into plea agreements regardless of actual guilt. The racial disparities in treatment she witnessed firsthand, and the casual cruelty that had become normalized within the system. Her testimony became the foundation for federal police reform legislation that would establish new oversight mechanisms and accountability structures for departments nationwide. Beyond the criminal proceedings, the case had profound ripple effects throughout Chicago. The previous victims of the corruption scheme received justice through both criminal proceedings against their persecutors and civil settlements acknowledging their ordeals. Dr. Carter, still recovering from his injuries, announced that he would use his $1.2 million settlement to establish a legal defense fund for victims of police misconduct who couldn't afford representation. No one should face this system alone. He stated at the press conference his injuries healing but still visible, and no one should have to choose between justice and financial ruin. Officer Rodriguez, initially ostracized by fellow officers as a rat, he became part of a new integrity unit within the Reform Department. Her courage in testifying, despite threats and intimidation, made her a symbol of the positive change possible within the system. When interviewed about her decision to come forward, she simply stated, "I took an oath to protect and serve the community, not to protect corrupt officers who prey on that community." The criminal cases against the corruption network proceeded with methodical precision. Hoffman and Conley, facing overwhelming evidence, including their own recorded confessions captured by Zaria's concealed devices, attempted to negotiate reduced sentences by providing information about other corrupt networks. Despite their cooperation, the severity and systematic nature of their crimes, combined with the racial targeting component, resulted in 25-year sentences for civil rights violations, extortion, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. Their sentencing hearing was overseen by Judge Amara Johnson, a Black female federal judge, who delivered a powerful statement about the betrayal of public trust. When those entrusted with upholding the law become its most egregious violators, they don't merely commit crimes, they undermine the very foundation of our justice system and the public's faith in it. She stated, looking directly at the former officers. "Your actions were not merely corrupt, but actively perpetuated the racial inequities that have plagued our justice system for generations. The sentences imposed today reflect not only your criminal actions, but the profound harm you have caused to individual victims and to society's trust in law enforcement." For Zaria, returning to normal life proved unexpectedly challenging. Despite her extensive field experience, the extended period of detention had affected her more deeply than anticipated. She experienced PTSD symptoms, startling at loud noises, anxiety in confined spaces, and occasional nightmares about her time in custody. Recognizing the importance of addressing these issues openly, she took temporary leave from her FBI position to recover and reconnect with family. "If someone in my position with all my resources and knowledge found this experience traumatic, imagine the impact on ordinary citizens who face this system without power or preparation," she noted in her only personal interview about the experience. During her recovery period, Zaria established a mentorship program for young people from disadvantaged communities interested in law enforcement careers. "Diversity isn't just about appearances or statistics," she explained to the first cohort of mentees. "It's about bringing different lived experiences to the table. We need officers, agents, prosecutors, and judges who understand the communities they serve, not just professionally, but personally." 6 months after the trial, Zaria visited the county jail where she had been held now in her official capacity as part of an oversight committee implementing reforms. Walking through the facility, she passed the cell she had occupied, pausing briefly to remember the despair she had felt within those walls. The moment of reflection passed quickly as she continued to the warden's office, where she led a meeting about new accountability measures and improved conditions for pretrial detainees. As she left the facility, she noticed a young black woman watching her from near the visitor's entrance, recognition and admiration evident in her expression. Rather than continuing to her waiting vehicle, Zaria approached her. "Director Washington," the young woman said with visible awe, "I'm Kendra Taylor. I'm studying criminal justice at Chicago State because of your case. It changed everything about how I saw the system and my place in it." Zaria smiled, recognizing the importance of this moment of connection. The system only changes when brave people are willing to change it. She told Kendra their brief conversation representing the passing of a torch to a new generation of reformers. Returning to her waiting FBI vehicle, Zaria felt a sense of completion that had eluded her since the case began. The corruption network had been dismantled, justice had been served, and perhaps most importantly, the experience had revealed both the depth of the problem and the path toward meaningful reform. As her driver pulled away from the facility, she opened her laptop to review the latest reports from field offices nationwide, ready for the next battle in the ongoing struggle for a truly just system. Do you think more law enforcement leaders should experience the justice system firsthand, like Zaria did, to truly understand its flaws? Would police departments benefit from having more diverse officers who understand the communities they serve? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story of justice and accountability inspiring, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that systems can change when brave individuals stand up for what's right. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of courage, justice, and transformation. Remember, real change starts with people willing to risk everything to expose corruption and fight for a better world. This story illustrates that true justice often requires extraordinary courage and personal sacrifice. When systems become corrupt, especially those designed to protect us, the rot can spread throughout entire institutions until misconduct becomes normalized. Zaria Washington demonstrated that sometimes to truly understand injustice, one must experience it firsthand, even from a position of power. Her willingness to relinquish comfort and safety to gather evidence revealed how racial bias can become embedded in law enforcement, creating two different systems of justice based on skin color. The officer's racist targeting wasn't random, but systematic and profitable, showing how discrimination can be both ideological and economically motivated. Perhaps most importantly, this story highlights that meaningful change requires diversity in positions of power. People with lived experiences of discrimination who understand communities they serve. It reminds us that no one should be above the law and that accountability must exist at every level of the justice system. Finally, it demonstrates that while corruption can be widespread and deeply entrenched, brave individuals willing to risk everything can dismantle even the most powerful networks of injustice, creating pathways for lasting reform. Have you ever witnessed abuse of power or discrimination and felt powerless to stop it? Has this story changed how you view our justice system and the courage required to reform it? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about whether you believe more leaders should experience the systems they oversee firsthand. Would you have the courage to put yourself in a vulnerable position to expose corruption like Zaria did? Comment justice if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment under the law regardless of race or social status. If this story of bravery against racist corruption moved you, please hit that like button to help more people discover it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice triumphing against overwhelming odds, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one person can make a difference. Thank you for joining us for this incredible journey of courage and transformation. Remember, in the fight against injustice, your voice and support matter.